Welcome, Heiner.
Heiner, Stacy, Barry, Doug.
Hi there.
Heiner, you look 10 years younger today.
Who?
You look 10 years younger today.
I sound older.
Haircut.
Is that what it is?
No, 10 years older.
You really do look younger. As if you've been in some kind of a makeup for a studio production or something. You're all
You see? You can read?
Cherry mix.
See?
Are you doing a video?
No, I'm just preparing for the session with the Club of Rami on Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
No, and I was very disillusionized yesterday after our session. I mean,
yeah, I get that, but
in the 5th hour.
actually, I think you did something very interesting, which provided a valuable piece of data. Inadvertently, but valuable.
Thank you.
Sam also provided some data, which I don't think was inadvertent. I think he had some sechel behind what he was doing.
So is this something that you want to share and unblock here?
Certainly, I'm prepared to share it. It's up to whether Sam and Heiner and Stacy want to dive into it, but I think Sam knows what page I'm on. Oh, wait, did Sam go to deal with the dogs or something?
Sam went to shower.
Oh, no, he's still here.
Well, you guys are on this juicy topic, so I'm going to have to stay a little bit grimy if you want me to participate in this.
I just want to make sure that we can talk about what you and I talked about offline during and after yesterday's session.
There's multiple things that we did yesterday, so I'm not exactly sure what you referred to. Was it amplitude?
It was amplitude, and what was the word that you used, Heiner? That word that has two different meanings in German?
Civility?
Berate.
No, berate.
Yeah.
Berater.
Yeah, berated, which in German has a different, it's more like consulting in German, but in English, berating doesn't sound like consulting. So yeah, berating and raising voice are sort of two sides of the same coin. And also Sam this morning posted a quote. What was it about? It was about tolerating bullshit, right? Is that, am I remembering correctly? Yeah. And that how it's important not to tolerate bullshit. And the question is, how do we go about expressing disapproval and intolerance of bullshit? And so one of the topics is what is our mutually agreeable protocol for expressing intolerance of bullshit? Disapproval.
Before we go there.
Sorry?
Before we go there, there could possibly be a simpler first step, which is in the behavior among the five of us. Do any of the five of us subscribe to the theory that amplitude at volume 14 is one good way of dealing with bullshit?
By the way, it's only 12. I was being hyperbolic.
Yeah, but you've been 14 before.
I know, I said 14, I was being hyperbolic. But if you do the dBs, the decibels, it actually was 12.
Don't do the dBs, it doesn't matter, okay?
I know.
Okay.
But I was exaggerating. I can't actually do 14. So it's like 84 dB or something.
So anyway, just based on the people who've been around for several decades in reasonably successful lives, I'm just questioning whether resorting to volume 14 or 12 with interruptions for some extended period of time is a method that we ought to toss into the mix as far as potential good ways to deal with bullshit.
It's one extreme measure which I am prepared to use in extreme conditions, not routinely, very rarely, as you know.
Turning more
hold on, Stacy.
So since I don't think we're going to agree, heard Barry and Sam go back and forth. What I would say is, if you were going to use that to a volume 12, once is enough. Anything more than that initial thing that catches everybody's attention, then it becomes disruptive.
Yeah, okay. I need to share with you something that I'm not sure all of you, if any of you, have gone back to look at, although maybe some of you have. If you remember, Stacy and Sam, that marathon Zoom session where you guys invited me to participate, but then you both dropped off and it went until 2:30 in the morning. But only the last 10 minutes is what really counts in terms of that. In the last 10 minutes, when it's literally 2:30 in the morning, after 7.5 hours, Colin actually raised his voice at me. And I'm going to try to replicate as close as I can to how he acted. He went like this: listen, listen, listen. Did any of you remember seeing that, the segment that begins with that?
I don't remember it, but I can imagine that his frustration had built to a level where he just exploded.
I've been listening to him for 7.5 hours, talk about all kinds
You
of
both
ways.
should have gotten off that call.
I got off that call about, that was the last 10 minutes.
So just for reference and refresh, we're not in principle supposed to be talking about people that aren't here, especially in an adverse, negative, or critical light.
You can go back and look at the video if you prefer.
No, you're missing my point. Just from a protocol standpoint, not appropriate.
Okay. Well, then what do you want to do?
If the proposition is that raising voice is an appropriate tool to keep in the toolbox, it's missing the point, which is, if that's what you have to resort to, you already lost the war long before.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I lost the fact.
So it is not about, it's not about constructing a frame of reference that says that's a choice that's good.
Not in that,
because it means you're way past the point of handling, relating to, dealing with, and or engaging with whatever the subject was.
Yeah, I don't disagree
You've
with that.
already failed. So raising your voice is not
Yeah.
in service to anything, because it's already lost. It's gone.
I
The
agree
moment,
with you, Doug.
the communication, the exchange, the potential for any kind of generative value is long gone.
So can we talk about what happened in the last 3 minutes of yesterday's session when the person who's not here now turned off his camera and disconnected? Because he wasn't talking at the time, but Heiner was. Heiner wasn't raising his voice at the time. Heiner, do you remember the last things you were saying when the person who's not here turned off his camera and disconnected?
Well, I'm still thinking about it, and I'm still out of words. And I think I would like to raise the issue when the person is here, not now. I think we have to debug GCC, what is happening here. It is about civility, civic dialogue, and respect and reciprocity. And what I'm experiencing here. I'm experiencing here a lot of good-minded people who stay on for hours and hours, and some are really desperate.
Yes.
I called you, Barry, yesterday, and I said that I understand you, that you are thin-skinned. You are getting too emotional and really lost your powers. And I mentioned this, you or another being a teacher in a group. What can he do? He cannot run out. He's responsible for all pupils. He can raise his voice, and you should only do it one time. So I'm Stacy, then I'm with you. And then I think other people, like the parents of that class, should move in. Because what we are having here as GCC is that we don't have a proper protocol.
Yes.
And we have this behavior And Barry, you're also interrupting me very often. So this is normal and it works fine with 5 people. But what I experienced when the groups are getting larger and larger, the more we have to agree on a certain behavior. And what I experienced when you get out of your skin and raise your voice, a Japanese would not do it one time. He would take the dagger and kill himself. The other cultures will never speak about themselves. So a third person has to come in and give an objective observation how he perceives it. And what I experience with some people, that they misuse our group. And that's why I was putting in the criteria of laws or axioms to really make peace in large groups in different cultures. And that is a painful process, sometimes over years. It needs to bury the arms and have a year of peace, like we had with the Delphi year of peace and the Suk Alukas, like they called it in Arabia. Here we don't have it. We have people coming in, saying some bullshit, and really destroying the whole process. So I liked very much what Sam was doing on the Saturdays, coming to structured dialogues, to some structures, to commitments, to some laws, means, and ends. And when pupils in a class are not really being part of the group, then someday maybe they go to the same class a year later and are not following the next grade, because that is also a very good idea, and they don't have the same teacher anymore. So we have to really see how much time we waste. I feel it got worse and worse over the years. It is always the same people. And then some people just come in with some theories or visions or ideas or conspiracies and really overtaking the whole dialogue. That not even a landing page where people are is possible to follow. And what you are doing, Barry, I really cannot understand you. How can you sit with one person or the other for hours and hours and days? This is really not okay, I think, for both sides. The one side maybe don't want to learn, and the other doesn't know how to teach, or is desperate or whatever. But then you separate and not have that going on. And the specific situation from yesterday, I will only raise in the situation when the person is there, because I was really, how do you say, lost?
Okay.
Desperate?
Okay.
Anyway, I didn't want it to talk so long.
But it's allowed. Sam, you have your hand up.
Verloren. Yeah?
What?
Okay, verloren.
You're a little bit muffled, Sam.
You're for some reason your sound is muffled.
Okay, sorry. I have a fan on over here to my right. And unfortunately, I don't want to turn my fan off because it's so hot. So I'm going to speak into the microphone. So I'm doing that right now. Hopefully it's coming through, okay?
Yes, it is. You're
Yes.
good.
Okay, all right. So just one point, okay? And this is going to sound repetitive, but I'm going to go back to Einstein after this, okay? Which is, we could foretell 3.5, close to 4 years ago, that small groups of people could rely on themselves to be honorable, respectful, compassionate, interactive, curious, generous. But that takes on a different sense as you get larger groups together. And we don't have the same notion of what generous means, curious means, listening means, patience means, okay? So the early request, and I'll say on the record that I made, to understand certain acceptable guidelines, and we can use the rules word or guidelines or protocols or boundaries, whatever, okay? I'm a non-native English speaker, okay? We can pick the word later. But the point is that without those, we fall off the track sometimes. And it was inevitable. It was 100% inevitable that if we did not adopt guidelines and protocols, whatever, okay, moments like Saturday or previously or other 6 times that Barry's blown up, they were inevitable. 100%. I predicted that 4 years ago. But it took 4 years now, close to 4 years, for us to, as a group, understand it. So if we do not accept those agreements and protocols early on from wisdom, from experience, from having lived in the world, if we do not accept that and we say, oh, we'll just be here, we'll just accept each other, we'll just see what happens, we'll see what emerges, then this is what happens. And it was 100% inevitable. So every time I kept stressing, the request for agreements is an enabler. It's an empowering step. It's a collaboration step. It's a way for us to move forward with less friction, with less disappointment, with less difficulty. And I would stress that if we don't even realize that now, we're hanging on to something with some extreme attachment. And that's another issue to look at. But now I'm hoping that after 4 years, we've all seen it. We've all seen what value agreements can have, what value protocols can have, what value shared memory can have, what value some of these guidelines can have. I really urge us to level up, get out of kindergarten, get at least the 1st grade and adopt these things, okay? Over.
So I have a question for you all. Now, obviously, I wasn't there yesterday, but I can sort of imagine, I think. If you have agreements, guidelines, and protocols, and you still end up with an anarchist in the room, what do? You
apply them.
You what?
You apply them. You apply those agreements, protocols, and guidelines. Okay, you apply them.
Right. So the agreements, protocols, and guidelines, if you have an anarchist in the room, would dictate, I would assume, that you throw the person out.
No,
you bar them from entry.
No, you're assuming that that's.
Or you put them up in a firing squad, or you put them in jail.
No,
there's some draconian recourse.
Huge assumptions.
Why are those huge assumptions if you have somebody who is not interested in following rules, doesn't actually, beyond that, doesn't even understand, how they might be violating customs, protocols, etc. If you have a person who literally does not have the capacity to understand and is doing themselves the way they do themselves,
those are huge.
And your agenda. No, it's not a huge assumption. There are people that don't know when they're being
assholes. I'll show you why they are huge assumptions.
Why are they huge assumptions?
Okay, because you're assuming that you can properly and accurately label someone as an anarchist. I didn't.
No. That wasn't my hypothetical. Hold on. That is not something I assumed. That is a hypothetical. That's a hypothetical that I framed. I said you have a group of people that have rules and protocols that have come into alignment, and you have somebody arrive who does not grok rules, doesn't understand, has no self-awareness of how they behave, what they do, how they interact, doesn't share any common understanding. That's my hypothetical, okay? And for all your rules and your protocols and whatever, if that person is disruptive and irremediably so, then you have no choice if your agenda is to keep the trains running and to keep things flowing and all that stuff, you have no choice but then to get them out, to exclude them, to shoot
Again,
them,
there's a
to
lot of
finish them,
huge
to
assumptions
lock
there.
them up. No, there's no assumption. If your agenda is to keep the train running
You're
and you
assuming
got something
my
on the
agenda.
track, you got to move it off the track.
You're assuming my agenda.
No, I'm not assuming your agenda. I'm framing
Okay, I'm gonna
the
go take a shower now
challenge.
because you're not listening, Doug.
Okay, so that's a reciprocal sense, but go ahead, Stacy.
Okay, so first, I just want to say that 3 different situations occurred yesterday. So without saying names, I'm going to say somebody came in, they didn't break any rules as far as I could see. However, what they were saying was what I think many people considered bullshit from the beginning. So the first thing I'd say is that we have to approach that not assuming it's bullshit right away. And that's, and myself included, I'll state for the record, I thought it was bullshit, but I didn't want to assume that. I still wanted to lean in, but only a small amount, because my feeling is, how much attention do you give to something that is just not going in a good direction? I'd rather, if I could at least have a baseline of where I could see where the person's coming from, that's going to be more effective. As a response to that situation, someone else broke the rules by exploding. And they explained why they did that, because it was possibly a dangerous, I mean, the earlier discussion could be seen to be dangerous. I could see it that way as well. You know, sort of like if somebody's coming on and saying women should be owned by their husbands, like how long do you let them keep talking about something like that? So that was the second situation of the rule break. The third one, I wasn't there for, but I think it had to do with somebody finally saying, I've had enough, and leaving, and I won't get into that one. And the last thing I want to say is I've seen too many people in this group, always men, never women, just go on and chastise and shame people publicly for their behavior. I don't like that at all. You know, it's one thing, I mean, I've said yesterday, you know, I texted Sam, I said I wasn't so proud of my performance yesterday because I lost my footing because of all the emotion that was going on. However, that being said, one time to say something, I mean, I came straight out and I told somebody that I don't really trust their judgment. Now, that could be seen as really, really rude, but I felt it needed to be said. I said it once, I said it as nicely as I possibly could, and I think that's enough. I think some of the men in this group go overboard and just keep hammering and hammering and hammering. And, you know, I want to tell you all have little children inside of you too. And you should start nurturing that little child. And the last thing I'll say is, on the positive side, is that what I saw at the end were 2 people who have been known to have violent outbursts with each other, actually sharing a pretty nice conversation. And that is to the credit of this group. And with that, I'm complete.
Gary?
It's really hard sometimes to understand somebody's motivation. I think we saw a little bit of that just already about why people do what they do. And my professional career and my talent, which is how I earned a living, had to do with understanding really hard to understand dynamics of systems that were going awry. Necessarily human systems, it could also be just a telephone network, systems that were going awry in inexplicable ways. And what I found I had to do, if I was assigned the responsibility of diagnosing it, is I had to understand what was going on. And understanding meant paying attention to a mess for a long, long time before I could get some insight into what was going on. And so why would I spend two very long nights in a PM and one very long night in a Zoom trying to understand the behavior of a system, I'll just use the word system, that people say, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. I can't, what's going on here? And I am one of the few people who will, for a period of time, spend an enormous amount of time and attention trying to understand the inexplicable. Sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail. But that's what I was doing. Why would I attend to a 2-night PM that I did not originate from a total stranger that went on for 4 or 5 hours, 2 nights in a row, that the conversation made no sense? Why would I sit and listen for 7.5 hours to a rambling monologue that I couldn't make sense of, except the next morning, Sam said, did you get anything out of it? And I said, I can write in one paragraph a piece that I got out of it. I got one thing out of it. Out of 7.5 hours of verbiage, I got 1 or 2 little pieces, and I can write them up for you, Sam, in a paragraph. And I did. But trying to understand the inexplicable, that's my gift. For better or for worse, succeeding or failing, that was my gift.
Stacy and then Alex.
Alex had his hand up first.
Okay, Alex, then Stacy.
Trying to understand the inexplicable is like looking for a black cat in a dark room that's not there. That's all. Over.
So Barry, I think that when you say, why did I do that? I think the answer had to do with your curiosity, and not that that's a bad thing, but an individual's motivation, in this case, your curiosity. Should it really be more important than somebody else's motivation, which I don't know, maybe it was to be heard or to feel heard or whatever it is. I think the problem that we, the challenge that we face is that we all have our individual desires and a point we're trying to get to. And we're not so good at like stepping back a little bit and, flowing. Sometimes we have to give up what our immediate desire is and let somebody else have a little bit more space.
When somebody says, listen, 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 I want to be understood, and somebody who says this is very, very hard to understand, that's a problem that says, okay, lots of people have tried and not gotten very far. I'll take a shot at it.
But Barry, just one more time. if after 7 hours, somebody feels not heard, then maybe there's something that's off with the listener, and maybe it's just shouldn't even be continued. Maybe it's just not the right mix, because after 7 hours, something should, I don't have the words.
I think that was Heiner's point, right? So there's this human factor, the human being factor. And, somebody sitting saying, listen, 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 not feeling heard, not being understood, just wanting to be understood. My father in his last 2 years was evidencing early stage signs of dementia. One of the things that can happen with that is that certain perceptual functions work, but certain processing functions of what they're perceiving stop working. So I noticed all of a sudden a proliferation of clocks all over his apartment. I'm like, where are these clocks coming from? And why is he sending somebody out to get these clocks? And what's going on? And the problem was he could see the clock, but there was only one clock out of literally 25 that he could actually extract the time from. He couldn't recognize what the clock was telling him, even though he could see it, but his brain no longer could functionally process certain types of clocks. Okay. So there are people that not intentionally misrepresent what they need or what they want or what they're asking for. They don't know they're doing that. But it's actually a setup
A what?
for others to respond.
Setup.
Say again?
Set up.
Set up.
SET-UP.
Thank you.
It's a setup
Yes, thank you.
to elicit a response that ends up affirming the need, keeps the need going. Okay? It's unconscious on their part. And to an unwitting person sitting across the table, taking them literally, they have no idea that they've been drafted and cast into a play that the other person is running in their head as a character to fulfill a need and purpose.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is to leave them at the end of whatever the interaction is, affirmed in whatever the starting belief was. I am never heard, I can't be understood, or I can't this, or I can't that. So every single person has greater or lesser degrees of this going on. There are a few people, once in a blue moon, you meet somebody who's actually not in sort of a distorted belief space, perception space, who actually is present in the moment and paying attention and getting it. And if that same person is coming from a place of being in service too, then they would recognize quickly in that 7-hour thing you did, they would have recognized quickly that this wasn't about whatever the person said it was about something else. And they would turn to him and go, you know, this isn't really getting anywhere. What's really going on for you? Like, what are you feeling? Right? And get underneath it and go after finding out what's really in pain. And it's an emotional thing. It's not intellectual. It's not about information or ideas, right? And knowing to do that, having the awareness to do that, right? So I'm no different than anybody else in going through the same process with the same person. But I rather quickly figured that out and said, what's really going on? I went after what's the truth here for you? Like, what's driving this? And I got back, I am not interested in talking about that. And I said, no problem, that's fine. But then we're done. Right? Now, it's not a we're done, I'm gonna judge them. It's not a we're done, I have any energy attached to that, anger attached to that, frustration attached to that. It's we're done because I'm not, for me, on my own behalf, it doesn't serve my interest, curiosity, needs, or other if there's not going to be progression in one way, shape, form, or another. Right? So that's up to me setting and me having clarity and setting boundaries in a rational frame of my own, based on reason, not reactivity. Okay. Let's extrapolate to group. And there's this group called the GCC. And, you know, generally it's got, you know, a hand or two handfuls of people, mostly a handful these days, at any given one point in time. And all these same dynamics play out in groups. And the question is whether there's the potential, there's enough potential for each individual, and this is my take belief, it may not be right, but it's what I've gotten to, is whether each individual has the intrinsic interest, drive, and potential to transcend themselves in service to connecting with and understanding other, whoever the other is. Like that's sort of the call to action. Can that happen by and between a group of people? And the experiment is still living and the verdict is still out. And the challenge, the biggest challenge in it that has been recurring and that I've witnessed is this issue that's being raised. What happens when, and all it takes is one person who is coming from a different frame with a different and varied level and degree of awareness or understanding on whatever the subject matter domain is. And is much more vested in interest in being right than in being close.
Being what?
Right.
Then being,
Winning. Being right. R-I-G-H-T.
just that next word after that.
Then being close.
Than being,
Then being close. Thank you.
On a connection basis, on a
Okay.
human, felt, sensed, embodied, experiential basis, being connected, looking at you and going, Lantzman, you're my friend, I'm your friend. We know that. That's where we're starting from. And when somebody's internal belief systems and fears and worldview becomes more important to them than connection on a human level, it all goes to shit. And for some, it can be a political belief, and for some, it can be a fear of the other gender, and for others, it can be, fear of clowns, whatever the fuck the driver is for the individual who, in whatever part of their cognitive, emotional, spiritual, living projection into the world, whatever part of them is so strong that protecting and affirming that trumps everything else, including peace, then that's the outlier, that's the challenge. And how does the collective, this is the $1 million question that I, am living in, attempting to get to the bottom of, in the solution for in Barry way, right, is how does the collective respond to that person differently in such a way and in service to neutralizing or enabling transformation or transcendence of that in that person, such that everybody gets back to center of connection as human beings together, co-creating. That's my $1 million life question. Fair.
Yeah. If I can double back to something that I learned from Dov and from Heiner and from my friend Rob Cans some weeks ago, I had said that a lot of times when I listen to somebody, I can't parse the sentences. I can't get the semantic content. If I were to take the transcript and read it, I would say I have no idea what.
Barry, I just froze on you, and I really don't want to miss what you were about to say. So could you just go back like 10 seconds? My internet has been really kludgy today.
Yeah. So I had said that sometimes when I'm attempting to attend and listen or read what somebody is communicating, I try to get the sentences. Can I get the words of the sentences? Can I diagram subject and predicate and get the meaning, the semantic meaning? And sometimes I can't extract any semantic meaning. It's just verbiage. And Dov came back and said, don't listen for the meaning, listen for the emotions, he said. And shortly after that, Heiner reinforced, he said, listen for the energy, in some sense, the energy of the emotions. And sometimes the emotions are so softly, below radar that I can't detect them, but they're there. And sometimes the emotions get high energy and you get them. And in drama, they have to do that intentionally so the audience can get the emotions, because the actor has to exaggerate the emotion. Otherwise, the audience doesn't pick it up. So Dov says, listen for emotions. Heiner says, listen for the energy level. And my friend Rob Kanzer, who studies under Rosenberg, the nonviolence guy, says, listen for emotions, listen for needs, listen for requests. Doug, you say asks, he says requests. So I've been processing that guidance from Dov, from Heiner, from my friend Rob Kanzer. Don't try to, if you can't make sense of the words as a thesis with semantics, can you get the emotions? Can you get the undeclared needs, the undisclosed needs? Can you get the unexpressed requests? Which for me is hard because normally I try to get the semantic content. Okay. Now, one of the things you have to do, no, not have to do, but you might do, is you say, if somebody is using a lot of verbiage and you can't get the emotions and you can't get the needs and you can't get the requests, you sort of have to make wild guesses at them. Can you create a culture where it's okay to raise the energy level of emotions? Make that culturally acceptable up to some level. So what did I do? I went to a really high level of emotion. So it's unmistakable, totally unmistakable. Everybody got it. Sam comes back and Heiner comes back and says, that's too high. Stacy says, that's too high. If you're gonna express an emotion, there is an optimal level of energy. Barry exceeded it way too much. And I agree. And in fact, I exceeded it in some sense on purpose because I wasn't sure how high I was gonna have to go to be able to communicate an emotion and have it received unmistakably. But at the same time, I don't know if Sam is still listening or not, I observed Sam do that yesterday, except that he went up to, I want to say, level 8 in intensity. And he was berating me. And I sat there and I very, calmly listened to him berate me at a level 8. And I kind of thought, this is a little out of character for Sam. And I talked to him about it afterwards. And I thought, Sam was modeling a better version of what I was modeling very clumsily. Sam was modeling how to express an emotion at an intensity level that is within protocol, within the range of acceptable protocol. And even if I sort of started to say, you're interrupting. So it was very interesting that he had transferred the message from the original target to me, to see how I would react when I was berated, to use Heiner's term, at an elevated volume. And I just sat there and I listened to him. And I think Sam, this is just an hypothesis, it's my working hypothesis, that Sam was modeling a better version of what I had attempted to do very clumsily. And what's interesting is that a little bit later when Sam went off, Heiner also did some berating, but at a very low intensity level, just a very mild intensity level. And it had a very curious effect. Person turned off their camera and disconnected right in the middle of it. Which I'm still trying to process. Is there meaning to that observation, that cause and effect? What level of feedback in terms of the content of the feedback, the sentences of the feedback versus the intensity of the emotion that's driving the feedback, what's the one that's having the effect? Which, if any, are any of those constructive, or are they all counterproductive and iatrogenic and destructive? That's what I would like to sort of sift through because now we've got evidence. We've got evidence of how I tried it. We have evidence of how Sam and Doug tried it. We have evidence of how Heiner tried it, how Stacy tried it, how others have tried it. We have lots of variations from all this raw data. Can we draw any insight into how to handle these situations? Go ahead, Heiner. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Hold on, it's actually Stacy, then Alex,
Oh,
then Heiner.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Heiner, can yours wait? Go first because I might pivot a little bit.
Yes, I'm addressing immediately, Barry. I don't agree. Maybe it is my way to speak, maybe because I'm German and I understand consulting and advising when you say berating, because Berater is this word in German, but I was not at all in any way raising or berating. I see it totally different. I was acknowledging and supporting. And it was really in the moment when I said, this is such a great situation. I see you even laughing. It was really a good session. And I said, it is so well now because you have your camera on. And so I can see you, because I have much problems understanding people when I cannot see their face, because I have much more problems with identifying what you say and mean. And it was this situation that I was put maybe into the box of the teacher, but I'm not supposed to be a teacher, but a friend or a colleague, that something went awfully wrong. So I just wanted to say, in no way I raised my voice.
You didn't.
According to my feeling, and I in no way wanted to berate, exactly the opposite. And then something happened like unexpected.
May I?
Well,
follow
hold
up
on,
that?
it's,
Okay.
there's Stacy and there's Alex.
So,
Pass.
thank you. I don't want to address the part that Heiner's talking about at the end. That's a different situation with different people. I want to go back to the beginning. And I want to say, Barry, I don't know if you recognize that there are so many other factors that come into play. So for example, I'll use myself. So I know that there's a better way to be. I know there's a way that I say I want to lean in, but at the same time, I'm having my own emotional reaction of this conversation is potentially dangerous. And then there's other factors that I can't control the situation because Barry's yelling and that's wrong. And, you know, somebody else is trying to be polite. And what I really want to say is that I think we should, and this is something I hear a lot of women talk about, that when we finally find, and it goes for men too, for people that finally find their voice, sometimes when it first comes out, it comes out really harsh. It's like a cork out of a bottle because they've held it in for so long. And I think that what would be helpful if we somehow find a way to make it easier. Like it was not easy for me to tell this gentleman, I don't really trust your judgment, but I thought it was necessary to say it, and to say it in a way that I'm just being honest. I'm trying not to say it in a charged way, but it's important because it was real. And we spend too much time trying to be nice, and nice is important and kind is important, but not at the expense of authentic or real, because then the reactions are just supercharged. That's how I see it.
Next. Was somebody had?
Alex
Alex,
was
okay.
next.
Unmute. Unmute.
Alex, you're muted. There you go.
I put a comment in the chat box. It was about reacting when you think you have to go to level 12 or 14 because the other person just off on a tangent, not listening, and upsurging whatever point you were trying to make. It causes you to react. That's never a good sign. I mean, an intelligent response made calmly and specifically to the point should be acknowledged by the other person. And if that doesn't work, then there's something wrong cognitively, you know. So that's all I wanted. That's the only point I wanted to make. Response, considered response. I learned to do that when I had memory issues after I gave up drinking 20 years ago. I wasn't using a telephone. I shied away from it. I got sick of embarrassing myself by not remembering who I'd spoken to and what we talked about, where we were, the arrangements we'd made to meet and things like that. And it was one of those things that works out eventually. I couldn't blame these people for getting upset, because you expect your friends to have a reasonable memory, and if they can't see the fact that you haven't got a good memory, they can't see that it's not visible on the surface, it's in your brain, it's buried away and hidden, it's a disability. But through the right diet and exercise, I've overcome that. Now we've got a situation where I'm improving and finding it easier to manage my life and avoid those situations. And I used email all the time instead of the telephone, and using email gave me that ability to respond intelligently with a considered response, instead of just blurting out something over the phone in a conversation directly. The first thing that comes to mind is not necessarily the best and most appropriate thing to say. Over.
Barry and then Heiner.
Yeah, okay. Heiner, I don't know if you've had a chance to go back and look at the closing minutes of yesterday's video. I urge you to look at the actual words you were speaking at the time of the departure, because what you had said before is absolutely true. No disagreement with that. But then you began to remind a person of some previous behavior back in the past, which I observed he appears to be evolving out of, no longer is doing, but you reminded him of what he had been doing in the past. And then he turned off his camera and disconnected. You were bringing up old issues, which I thought maybe he's evolving out of.
So it is by mistake. Sorry.
Letting you know. That's my
And,
observation.
I would need to look at it,
Yes.
but you see, I'm just feeling it.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what we just said before. What do we watch if we don't get all? So we realized you are more in words and I'm more into maps and visual, and others are more into video, and others cannot go along with videos at all. So we are all on very different parts of the spectrum. So I would like to correct, I'm not so much into emotions and energies, but into intentions and agendas.
Okay.
What is this person, when speaking, having in mind? What does this person want to convey? And if it's just 10 things in a row without any stop and totally out of context, it makes you dizzy, and then you think you have vertigo. But it's actually that there is no agenda, and that is really disturbing and distracting. And I have the same energy like blowing up when I see that people speak only when, as they feel they should speak, and somehow have a one-on-one with one person and the other group have to listen. That is stealing time. And that is very, very bad. If we would have the advice to only say one thing and think about it 3 times before you take the talking stick out of the center, and then you take it back, and then there is silence, and not the moment someone finishes, the other starts with something totally different and disrupting.
Yeah.
And this is my example from yesterday, when someone has an idea, like he met someone or heard a video of someone from Slovenia, and he cannot spell his name, and he cannot say what it is about, and he cannot give a link, then maybe that person should do homework and present maybe at another place. I have heard about a great guy this is his thesis, and I agree here and I disagree there. But like this, you're just throwing in some references without being able to spell. So what can the other people do with that? And that is stealing time. And that makes me really also very often say, bye-bye, I have better things to do.
Stacy?
I agree with what with what Heiner just said. I just want to make a quick point about the person leaving the call. Two things. Number one, we don't know why they left because we haven't gotten an answer from them. But number two is one of the recommendations that we spoke about when somebody is being so triggered is to turn off their camera and not speak. So either way, I think we should look at it through that lens.
Barry?
Yeah, I know that Doug and Stacy were present when I was in the hot seat in Gertrude's session. I'm not sure if Heiner was there that session. But I went back and I reminded, I disclosed a pattern in my own life because I have a pretty good skill at problem solving of challenging problems. You know, when I was at Bell Labs, my little calling card said innovative solutions to complex problems. And people knew that that was my skill, and they would come to me. Sometimes they would pay me good money at Bell Labs to spend 9 months looking at a really hard problem. And sometimes people in real life would come to me and say, Barry, I'm puzzled over some issue. Can you help me think it through? And that's fine. And once in a while, I had mentioned that somebody will come to me and simply reenact one of their own life problems out of the blue and dump it in my lap. And it's only happened a few times in my life, but it's enough to make a pattern. So I recognize the pattern. And sometimes I will say, okay, I think this person is recreating an instance of an unsolved problem from their own backstory and recreating it and dumping it in my lap. And I have two choices. I can think it through and try to act back a solution, or I can just walk away and say, get out of my life. And I've done both. But sometimes, for whatever reason, I get ensnared. I get taken in. I get drawn in. And before I know it, I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. It's just because that's my talent, it's my skill. And I'm not smart enough to recognize when I'm being manipulated to solve somebody else's problem without them simply revealing the problem by description, but reenacting it. But I know that when that happens, I have to act back a solution. That's what I do know. The question is, what solution do I have to act back that they can then absorb and make it part of their own repertoire going forward? And I think that's what may be going on here, and that I was acting back a solution because when people don't disclose their emotions, they won't tell you by name, or they won't by nonverbal gesture reveal their emotion. How do you get them to disclose their emotional state or their backstory or what's driving them? And in that case, that was a very rarely used technique that's part of my own backstory. And I think Sam caught on to it. I wish he was turn on his camera and say yes or no, but I think Sam caught on to that's what I was doing, and he was doing a better job of it than I had been doing. Acting back a solution for a human behavioral mode that was missing and needed to be present.
There's something in the way you're framing that gives me a tickle. So I'd like to ask into it if I
Sure,
can.
be my guest.
Because generally when people are triggered into an emotional response, they're not acting.
Yes, correct.
In your usage and frame, my sense is that you do experience it as an acting moment, not as a felt sense moment.
The thinking about it is normal. The response, the presentation of the response is acting.
Okay.
You see the
So-
difference?
So for most people, that's not the case.
Yes, I agree.
If you're seeing the world through that lens,
Mhm.
then you're missing a very big chunk of the back end energetic, emotional, psychological chemistry on an energetic level. Because generally when people are triggered and respond emotionally, react emotionally, it's no longer conceptual, it's no longer intellectual, it's no longer in their head. It's a completely different that's kicking in. And it's more lizard brain based. It's not rational. It is rooted in an emotional feeling and trumping of the rational, of the control centers of the higher level executive function centers, all the mechanisms that enable us to plan and think and evaluate consequences and reason and all that. All of that is cut off when somebody is emotionally triggered. It is not, and the physical representation in a dramatic frame is the most sort of thin and superficial dimension of what experientially that person is living and experiencing for most people.
Yeah, for most people, yes.
For most people. And I understand and do recognize that's not your experience.
Correct. I'm not
So-
most people.
So yeah, so the relating to it as a behavioral affect and using it in that way is not necessarily is not something that that the people that are living from a fully experienced emotional place are going to be relating to. They're going to take it at face value.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So from a signaling standpoint, is there a difference in its impact? 6 of one, half dozen the other. Maybe not. Maybe it's irrelevant whether it's felt sense or whether it's dramatically recreated for emphasis. At the end of the day, to my mind, what's the goal? What's the agenda? What's the intention in Heiner's context, which was if somebody's coming from not goodwill, if somebody's coming from a dark agenda, not in service to, not values aligned, then I suspect it doesn't make a difference whether they're feigning it as a dramatic performance or whether they're actually feeling it.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, the intention is probably more important to my mind. And the question, which I keep dragging everything back to at the center of it is, what is the collective response in the face of?
Mhm. Yeah.
And isn't there a better way for the collective response and for each of us individually to do that? And so I have a weekly conversation with somebody, and we're sort of like brothers from another mother. Like, it's really staggeringly insane how aligned we are in like so many areas. And there was this one area where, he was talking about a project or whatever, and he was detecting in me a sort of like, why do you give a fuck about that? and which is exactly what I was feeling, because it doesn't speak to me at all. And he was like, you know, I'm sort of coming from a lighter place. You're coming from this heavier place. Why is that? And we unpacked it. We went into a curiosity cycle, a questioning cycle, to drill down to the difference, this sort of, you know, where my heart centers in terms of in service to avoiding an extinction, and where his heart centers, which is, I want to have fun and connect people that I think would really like to be connected with each other. And all that is a difference in center and choice and preference and feeling being, like where he wants to be from, where I want to be from. And both of those are cool, and both of those are okay. And he doesn't need to, you know, join me in my, you know, fervency, and I don't need to join him in, you know, the wanton connecting of people. It's like, it's all good. Now, instead of the conversation we had, it could have been, take off the gloves, drop into lizard brain. What do you mean you just want to have fun and connect people? We're fucking going extinct. Right? What the fuck are you thinking? We have no more time. Like, what are you doing? And off to the fucking races. It's a fork in the road, but it, more importantly and most critically, it's a decision that ultimately comes out of a level of consciousness and self-awareness and collective awareness and all of that. And why are we still so fucking primitive evolutionarily that we can't do that better at this point? We can put a man on the moon, and we can do quantum computing, and we can't fucking, you know, stay out of lizard brain. It's ridiculous. Why is that? It's crazy. Heiner.
You wanted to, oh, sorry.
I would like to make sure that I'm understood. Intention and agenda is for me neutral, not value loaded. Only by looking at certain acts again and again, I can see a pattern. And then I can see, oh, this is always aiming at the same goal, but maybe using other words. And then by questioning this deeper, you can come to the, now I say hidden agenda, the intention behind, because very much people are somehow afraid, or they feel there is a conspiracy, or that they are endangered. And that is like a color veil, making you observe things in a certain way again. And that is again a pattern. And what I was just trying to say, we have to look into this unconscious very often for the person itself, not away and not being aware of why this might be not the appropriate response in a certain situation. Just wanted to make sure an agenda and intention has no direction for me.
Sorry.
I want to go back to the point that Doug was talking about of the distinction between an intellectual driven behavior and an emotion driven behavior, and the notion that you can do one or the other, but you don't really do both integrated, except there's one class of demographic who do that for a living. They're called actors. And actors can portray an emotion that's in the script. They're not actually feeling the emotion, but they're dramatizing it so effectively that the audience buys it. And acting is a skill. It's a learnable skill. Some people are really good at it and make an enormous amount of money being really good actors. And others are just so amateurish that you laugh at them for, how awful they are. Now, it's not a secret that I'm not an actor. I'm a terrible actor, and I'm not a script writer either. But I have taken dramatic moments of my own life, or dramatic moments where I was a witness or a participant, and I have written kind of a parody or a version of it that sort of recaptures it, but more carefully structured as if it were a script. So I will sometimes try to write an allegory or a parable or a satire or a fable or something that's drawn from a real life conflict, often on the social networks, but restructured so that it's more entertaining, so that people can listen to it, watch it, and get something out of it. And Stacy knows this because she and Josh enacted a couple that I wrote on a session a month or two ago. And I've written a lot of these little vignettes, all of which are taken from real life. And one of the ideas that's sort of been circulating here, and Stacy's been thinking about it, is what if we take some vignettes that have been crafted as little dramatic episodes, dramatic encounters, and enact them as if we're amateur stagecraft. And the idea is that if you can reenact a dramatic passage that originated from real life and play the roles, maybe play the other guy's roles, doesn't matter, but play the roles and then watch the characters evolve out of that, negative valence, high emotion into a resolution of it, that's a useful educational experience. And maybe that's one way of processing people out of a pattern that they've been in for a long time and reenacting the pattern intentionally in a scripted drama and evolving out of it in the space of a 15 match. I think that's a potentially useful way to evolve. And I think I give Stacy credit for suggesting that way back in October. And the role that I was going to play was, well, I'm going to write the song parodies in the musical comedy. The emotional moments in a drama, the characters stop and they sing a song. And the purpose of the song is to reveal the emotions to the audience that are sort of behind the scenes in the original drama itself. So the musical drama has this feature. You have this intense drama, and then you pause and you sing about it. And then you resume the drama. And that's sort of an interesting mechanism that I think little groups like this might actually benefit from. I'm perfectly willing to participate in that at my level of contribution. I can't sing songs. I can't play music. I can't write music, but I can write lyrics, and I can write little, dramatic sketches that are inspired by real dramas of the community in the past.
Stacy, Alex, I'm not quite sure which one of you were first.
I think Stacy's first.
I think so, yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad you said that. I just, I want to separate a couple of ideas, but the one thing I wanted to say is, so to me, this goes to work on the role of emotions and cognition.
Right.
So what I wanted to say is the thing with actors, when you're acting, it's not real. So all of those emotional factors aren't going to impact what you're doing. So you're able to just focus on the one thing. And that's what's really important. And that's why acting it out when it's some arbitrary people removes all the shame or guilt or defensiveness that you might have when you're living in that moment.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex?
I was thinking about the level of emotional maturity, emotional intelligence involved in higher thought patterns, especially in parodies like Barry's talking about when you've got a child asking an adult questions. If the adults are wiser, much older, and the child's asking, say, questions about politics, and international disputes, capitalism versus communism. You can have the parody written up like that with some background music, like, you know, Ride Like the Wind or whatever. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. But that's higher thought patterns are involved when you have a mission to achieve and you want to establish some rapport with the audience. If you've got the acting ability, you can use lines from Shakespeare and stuff like that. Especially the one I like is that nothing's right or wrong in the world, only our thinking makes it so. Over.
Can I just add that puppet shows are an easy way to do a drama? Just hand puppets. You don't actually have to do the whole thing with people on stage. And I learned as a child from fabulous puppet shows on television in the 1950s. They inspired me. Kukla, Fran and Ollie and Bill Henson and the Muppets. There was a whole, you know, Sherry Lewis. These puppet shows were a fabulous way of doing a very trivial instantiation of a drama about emotional issues that were important to children. Alex.
Hi, Colin.
This question of thumbs up.
Nope. I guess.
I missed the thumbs up with Sam.
Colin just showed us on his screen, if you missed it, that he has his sleeping grandchild on his chest. So that's why he's not speaking.
Okay. So that's my suggestion. Pick up where Stacy left off last October and think about doing some kind of little dramatic sketches, puppet shows, or however you like to do it, and process this material in a dramatic way that's both thoughtful and dramatic at the same time. Because what makes me different than the average person is that I did research on the interplay of emotions and learning, cognition, affect, and learning. There are integrated, but the dramaturgy is a profession. The actors learn to do that fabulously. And I think we can exploit some of that here and sort of rejuvenate GCC. Stacy has her hand up.
Another easier and more efficient way is to, we've talked about this also, to take shows that are already out there, pick a clip, and then discuss it. Because then we're discussing, somebody else that's not going to be hurt or insulted or have their reputation ruined.
And that, by the way, would have been the second part of the presentation, because Sam invited me to present my work on emotions and learning, and I had time in, I think, 2 hours to present the first third of it, which was the mathematical part. And the next part of it, which we ran out of time, was the dramaturgy part, the drama theory part. And so, except for people who've actually read the literature Stacy has, nobody here has actually seen me present the content on the dramaturgy part. And I've been here since October. I presented 1/3 of my research. One time, or one time plus 10 minutes.
Doug? Penny for your thoughts? Nickel?
I can't read his emotions on his face. I'm sorry. He froze.
I find myself, sort of internally questioning whether what I am chasing as the Holy Grail is possible.
Chasing the Holy Grail, did you say?
Yeah.
If what he's chasing is possible.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It is, in its own way, extremely challenging in the call to action because it requires a huge amount of patience and investment that most people aren't set up to make in current frame. The cultural frame is antagonistic to anybody reawakening and reconnecting with true self. You're supposed to either be preoccupied with the rearview mirror or projecting like mad into a future that doesn't exist yet. God forbid you stay in the present moment and tune in and actually be and respond from that place. So everything is set up to keep us from doing that as little as possible, because that's where the action is. And if we actually were to do that more, we would reconnect and reawaken to our own power and discretion and choice and put a lot of this crap to bed on a mass collective bottom-up basis. So they're keeping us from doing that. And the first thing that seems to happen when the opportunity is afforded to get into presence and feeling and space is for individual fears and belief systems and worldviews to go crazy in a projective way. It becomes competitive, and it becomes who wins, and it becomes who's right, and it becomes, who has it figured out best. And it turns into a battlefield.
Dramatize that?
And well, I'm not looking for things that, are elaborative extrapolations off of the phenomena to calculate backwards. It's hard enough just to get people to circle up and tune in and connect. Crawl before you walk, walk before you run. I'm not going to take people that can't even do that from a present moment conscious and aware place and ask them to do acting. I studied acting for several years. It's not like, I'm not looking to create actors. I'm looking to reawaken human beings and seed crystals. Maybe we awaken, and then we awaken others who we touch, and then they awaken others who they touch, and we actually start, evolving and transforming all of this competitive, egocentric shit that has us headed toward an extinction. So I'm cooking in that. I'm not judgmental of it. I'm not adverse to it. I don't view myself in any qualitative or judgmental way as better than or worse than. I'm just really interested in cracking the nut, figuring out how to catalyze collective, co-creative, generative collaboration in new ways that that sort of don't invite all of the dystopic projected power control over patriarchy, political, competitive, scarcity, fear-rooted stuff, which rules our world and our life these days, and the culture and society we live in. So, and I don't know. It's not like, I'm not purporting to have any magic answers. But I do know that with relative comfortable predictability, the half dozen ways that people tend to respond in a way that's not product of true 100% present moment freedom of choice, but reflexively because of internal fears, belief systems, and projection stuff. And healing that, creating spaces and enabling people to heal that, to leave it behind, to not be in the rearview mirror, seems sort of almost a precondition to actually then being in a position to collaborate. I don't know.
So I don't know if that has to be true. And I think that if there's any place where it doesn't have to be true, it's in some sort of creative pursuit, whatever that may be. So for example, over these past 5 now really divisive years, there's been one group that I've watched have relatively no issues. And that's in this one group of Grateful Dead followers. And they are
Yeah.
all different walks of life, but they're all connected in their music and in the enjoyment of coming together and either playing the music or listening to the music or dancing to the music. And that's sort of where I was going to with any of the ideas I ever come up with. It's all about being able to do the work, but in a way that you would do if you were doing for free. And that's why I'm more interested in bringing amateurs. You look for the professionals to lead the amateurs, but get the amateurs that haven't had that chance to express and that want to express.
Yeah, Barry?
Just a quick side, because when you said, I want to crack that nut, that reminded me of a very important book that a psychologist gave me 35 years ago. It's a book called Nutcracker. It was written by a journalist named Shana Alexander, who you may remember her name. And it was a true story. It was a true crime story about a woman who had a psychological disorder called borderline personality disorder. And she induced her son to kill his grandfather, her father, for the inheritance. And it's a really interesting story. By the way, the woman went to jail and since died, but I just want to bring that up because cracking nuts in that sense of the word is a very powerful idea. And the reason the psychologist gave me that book to read, and by the way, it was made into 2 made-for-TV movies based on the book, is because I was in a relationship with a woman who was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I was totally bewildered and discombobulated and being manipulated, and I had no idea what the hell was going on.
Alex?
When I was recovering, some of the people who were helping me were concerned about my progress, I guess. And the old lady, especially where I was doing the Course in Miracles weekly meetings and the AA weekly meetings in her home, was talking to me, and she said, I asked her, I said, what did you think of me the first time you met me when I was still suffering? I was pretty sick, You could tell that when I spoke and shared at the meetings in the group. She said, I thought this is going to be a tough nut to crack.
There you go.
Yeah, Stacy, in drilling down to sort of fundamentals and basics, which is my want to try to really get down to essential bedrock with things. If you think about, if the goal is to have people reconnect with themselves, with their beingness, their humanness, the only things that are in common, every human being on the planet, are play and the art. That's it. If everybody could play together, it's really tough to then go back to lizard brain killing each other.
And that's where safety and mistakes come in,
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely.
We can do this.
I know that Stacy can because she's tried it. Stacy and Josh have read a couple of scripts cold, just dialogue, dialogue scripts. I read it cold. And what Josh said is that Kusela was laughing. She was on the ground laughing out loud as Josh and Stacy were reading this one little short script.
It's about having enough opportunities for everybody to be doing their own thing at the same time, as opposed to, standing, waiting for your turn at bat. And that's where I think more attention needs to be paid, and it's not. And again, I think it's not because of the financial realities, and that's the system that we have to look into shifting. And I think one way to shift it is to change from money as the currency to attention as the currency. And I just haven't found the right time or put in the effort to articulating that properly.
Yep.
I'm with you there.
Attention is a scarce.
Time and attention is the most valuable resource we have as living, generative, creative beings.
Can we write something together, or can you pair me up, put me with somebody that could help write this up? Because I have the outline, but I just don't have the will.
Well, here's a part of the story when the kid's asking the adult about capitalism. The adult can explain to the child about the old man in the village who made shoes, and he made very good shoes. He was very good at making shoes. So all the people in the village would go to him when they needed a new pair of shoes. So his business flourished. He had a big factory and he expanded the factory. That was capitalism sort of thing. It was caused by consumer pressure, consumer demand. He's satisfying a need. And that the little kid understood then that that's what capitalism was. It's taking advantage of your own talents and doing something you love. So when children are just getting out of school, I encourage them to focus on something they love doing. Don't pick the thing that's going to make you the most money, or be a lawyer or a doctor or a politician. Think about what you enjoy, be a ski instructor or something, Depends on a musician or an actor.
Britney Spears, conservatorship,
Yeah.
capitalism.
Well, the internet is changing the landscape of the business world and in society tremendously. It's like Uber. You need a lawyer now, you need a medical advice. It's all on the internet, available at the touch of a button. And that's causing disruption, global disruption. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the disruption is causing suicides and family breakups, and horrendous crimes are being committed. But the thing is, it's also providing others with opportunities. And we're all like the fish in the bowl. is feeding time. You're either in or you're not. You know, you're part of the game or you're opting out. So this is the situation we're in. What's going to help humanity survive the difficulties we're facing? And what are the opportunities available there for people who are interested in doing things that are going to help reduce the pressure on society, reduce the harm that's going to be a result of lack of resources and food wars. Because there'll be food wars if the sea levels rise. I mean, we've got a 40-year time lag. And the prediction for CO2 emissions over the next 4 or 5 years is horrendous. There's no coming down. It's still maintaining its level that's cooking the world now. We've got to drastically reduce it, and that's going to cause an enormous amount of economic disruption around the world. So not all bad news, because we've discovered that certain plants remove CO2 from the atmosphere, like bamboo, the fastest growing grass on the planet, and hemp, and also a fast growing plant, which can produce all sorts of products and things and benefit the environment. So that's where I'm heading. That's what I'm looking at and studying as much as I can, learning as much as I can about that industry, because I've got time on my hands and people on the internet who are interested in, you know, these ideas. They give me ideas and they give me links to go and look at. They give me information sharing. That's why I started Links Plus. But it'll take a while before it's, when something's new, it takes a while to catch on. I learned that quite a while ago.
Centuries, millennia.
Yeah. You know, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, he teamed up with a friend of his, a doctor, and they worked on the AA concept of sharing, two people sharing with each other face to face the difficulties they were encountering and trying to control their drinking and find some sanity in their lives. And they worked on it. It took them about 15 years before it really developed and started to take off, and other groups started opening up in other towns. So it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you've got to work on it. With the internet, that could change things. Things can take off and go viral very quickly on the internet, but the circumstances have to be right. We have to incubate the ideas correctly, or as correctly as possible. Over.
Under optimal conditions, people can learn 10 times faster than normal on the internet, under optimal conditions.
So what are optimal conditions?
That's what I tried to establish 30 years ago. Could I create an online learning that was as close to optimal as I could imagine and foster? And that was the project called Micromuse, which I co-founded in 1990. A social contract, nonviolent learning community where everybody learned with and from everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not just, it wasn't a chat room. I mean, you could chat, but it was a system where you could build simulation models of anything you could imagine, whether it's real or totally fantasy. You could write code in the system that would create text that was dynamic. It actually reacted. It was code. And you could create anything you wanted, including your own avatar. And you could invite people to come in and participate with you or visit what you ever built. I built a whole bunch of stuff. I built a science museum and a little theater and a whole bunch of things, all interactive. And it was fabulous. And my rate of learning, I was in my 50s, my rate of learning skyrocketed for about 5 years. And that was true for pretty much everybody who was there. it lasted for about 5 years, and then the government made the internet go commercial. And that kind of changed the whole system. You had the World Wide Web and commercial sites and multimedia. It wasn't just text and code. And after about another 5 years, Micromuse kind of became a ghost town. But for a period of time, it was fabulous. The rate of learning was astonishing. Stacy.
The two most important pieces that I got from that is, one, everybody was learning from everybody else.
Bingo.
But two, there was a social component to that.
Yes. Yes.
And built in that was all the trust, the fun, the wanting to be there. And we need to pay attention to that.
It was more fun than sex. I mean, that's
Wow.
that's not hyperbole. I mean, people came to that community for about 5 years because they were having literally more fun than sex. And they were very creative. They were building things and co-creating things. It was wonderful, but it only really thrived for about 5 years.
But if they were having sex, you'd find it difficult to get them to come out and do something else.
Actually, some of them did simulated sex. They would get together in a little room by themselves and have a tryst. These are adolescents. They had to do it sort of more, molten wasn't. But so they had something called tiny sex, but you had to tolerate it, because when people have a conversation, they'll do pillow talk, quote unquote. We even had tiny marriages. We even had people who had pseudo marriages within the system. They were simulating elements of real life and fantasy, but it was just text.
So what made them move on to other places more specifically?
The advent of the World Wide Web and the multimedia, because everything that was just text up until about 1995, that's all you had was keyboarding. And once we had the World Wide Web, everybody started migrating over to the new technology, and that you couldn't create. There were places like Second Life which tried to do the same thing, but it's much harder to do stuff in Second Life than it was when all you had to do was write a little bit of code and a little bit of narrative.
So is it fair to say that it wasn't as accessible to everybody?
Yeah, although more people were on the internet by the year 2000, the talent that you needed to participate at that level, at that creative level, was much higher. And so people couldn't master the creative arts to do, so they turned into more, they turned into audience more than creative participants.
So that sort of parallels, there was some talk in the Facebook group about how, people aren't participating as much in the group and whatnot. And I think part of that is so many people have left and taken their work and their discussions to GitHub and Google and all these other places. And, that's why I was always for let's maintain a presence on Facebook, because it was a place where people with less skills, were able to, put their time. I don't put my time and effort in there anymore because it seems like it's a waste of my effort, because so many people are no longer there. So, the audience has changed.
But look at Deborah. She goes off and she writes a fabulous blog. She writes these really long, partly essays and partly stories, very creative, also, very intellectual. The kind of intellectually dense, but she went off to a blog and sort of processed it all, in her own space. I do the same thing. I have my own blog where I put stuff, and that's permanent. Stuff that's on Facebook, I can't guarantee it's going to be there, but what's even worse is that if I put any scholarly content from my actual scholarly research on Facebook, the bot thinks it's spam and fake news and junk. And they say this stuff violates community standards. Excuse me? Award-winning scholarship funded by the National Science Foundation, carried out at MIT and other universities, violates FB's community standards. And Sam has the same issue, and other people have had the same issue, that you put scholarly work on and the bots can't detect that scholarly work isn't junk.
So I just want to say one more thing, because I think the relationship between Barry and myself is a good example of what I'm trying to say. I don't read a lot of Barry's work because it takes too much energy, because it's written above, a lot of it's written above my head. So the stuff that I know is going to have special significance for me and what I'm interested in, I take the time and I do read that. And so there are many things that you might put on Facebook that I gloss over. When you CC me, then I go to it because I trust that you have picked something that you know relates to something that I want to know more about. But we know each other. We have a relationship. If you were some stranger, I would just scroll past. You know, and I have tried with many people in the group who have written like what's not, when I say above my head, it doesn't mean I can't understand it. It means it takes a lot of my time and attention to really understand it. And because I've wanted to be supportive of certain people, I've done that. But at some point you run out of energy, and it's not healthy to keep doing something for others. Sometimes you have to, you know, just take care of yourself. That being said, I like the opportunity of being able to weave in and out of different circles, because I don't want to be stuck in one spot at one level, because there's so many different facets of me as there are with everybody else.
I really regret that you can't create content in Facebook that's as powerful as the content in Micromuse in 1990, where you can write reactive code that you can engage with these automata and have these little fantasy sessions. You can't, it's all you got is conversation. You know, just narrative. I mean, there's a use for narrative, but you want to sometimes get into the action and, you know, get your hands on the wheel and drive the simulation.
Well, but that's exactly what I had been hoping to create in a series of groups set up like this, but doing different things at different times, almost like, you know, like a playhouse.
Yeah.
Where if you feel like writing today, you can write. If you want to write on, you know, you want to pair up with whoever, just lots of options.
This is Talking Heads. From my perspective, Talking Heads is really dialing down from the where we were 25, 30 years ago. It's really dialing down from where we were. I mean, we had talking fingertips, but more. You can also create permanent content.
Sam, did you come back?
Came back twice. Came back an extra time.
Yeah, I've been listening.
Reactions? Thoughts?
Okay, if you're curious, let me do one thing, which is perhaps obliquely related, but to me, it's very important, okay? There's always this notion that when we act intellectually or with reason or rationality, that it seems to be detracting from heart-centered action. I think primitive notion. I think it is possible to evolve so that just as we went from, you know, first chakra to second chakra, we can go from sixth chakra to seventh chakra and understand that all of them are in alignment, but that we also employ not just heart-centered skills and relating, but also intellect-related skills and relating. I think to feel that it's an either or, and that we must be heart-centered in order to really fully be human, is a quaint old notion. And I think we are ready to evolve beyond that. I think not realizing and appreciating the intellect and what we can do when it's in alignment with all the other ways of being and all these other ways of resonating and energizing is to de-appreciate, unappreciate, ill appreciate, mal appreciate that gift that we've been given, which took 14 billion years for the universe to create. And I really, really, really strongly feel this. And I think it's about time for us to move beyond and to really integrate intellect with heart, with all the other chakras, and really be that way fully human. Over.
Yeah. Put the word heart mind in. I have a correspondent who uses the word heart mind. It's one integrated system. It's not heart or mind, it's heart mind.
Yeah, but it's not just heart or mind, it's all the other chakras as well.
Yeah.
That's called integral theory. The like the teal experience, when you've got all the colors representing chakras combined, and they give an equal energetic allowances. So there's not just heart-centered, but there's all the others involved. Yeah.
Singing and dancing and the arts, broad spectrum of human activities.
Yeah, so Sam, I totally agree with you. But I also recognize that there is a necessity for awareness to combine those things and to have them move together.
No
I don't
doubt.
know anybody that doesn't think like I put in the, like, I'm not sure whose notion you're talking about, because I don't really know anybody that thinks that they should be separated.
I'm not talking about anybody saying that they're separated. I'm talking about people who actually focus more strongly on heart-centered action, and I think too easily dismiss the intellect and the mental.
They're both super important. And one thing that I want to say that I think needs to shift in the system because of what you're talking about is the ability for people who may have less of a stature intellectually to be able to bring up things to that person who's like, the head, who has the highest status, and to say, no, you're out of alignment here. Because traditionally that's not an easy thing to do. I have a great relationship with Barry, where even though he's the expert, he has all these awards, I can say to him, I think you were off here. Or even you and I have had discussions where you've asked me and I've felt safe enough to tell you. I think that's important too, because we do have to remember we learn from everyone. And if we're only measuring intellectually, that might hinder us from getting some of the messages.
Please note, I did not imply only.
Good.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was at Bell Labs, which was a big think tank, maybe one of the most famous think tanks of its day, my director, who was 2 levels above me, called me into his office one day and closed the door and he said, Barry, you make people think. It's in a think tank. Barry, you make people think. And I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? He didn't answer. This isn't a think tank. He was giving me negative feedback. Barry, you make people think. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, even in a think tank? And I have occasionally, not a lot of times, but a few times, made one remark, typically a question, but a remark, one sentence remark. The room went silent, dead silent. And one time I was in a workshop when that happened, a workshop run by an outside organizer. It was either managing professional growth or I don't know what the thing was. But I made a remark and the room went silent. And afterwards, the organizer of the session came up to me. She says, I've been running this workshop for, I don't know, 10 years. She says, I've never seen process stop, dead stop, like it did when you said, and I don't even remember the remark. But I've done that a couple of times. I ask a question or make a remark and everything goes dead stop. And I still don't know exactly what it was I said or did that caused process to stop.
But the point I'm trying to get at is that not everybody has that equal opportunity. So if somebody is viewed as being valued for something, so they're being paid a lot of money as an expert, they get a leeway that your average person who might have something to offer doesn't get.
Leeway. Sometimes I've been kicked out of Wikipedia, been
Well, I'm not just
kicked out of the well, kicked out
right.
of brainstorms, kicked out of John Keldon's group, kicked out of
Right.
Cafe Utney. Yeah, I've been kicked out for making people think.
Right. So I guess what I'm talking about is the other side. Like, why does somebody like Trump get away with things? Or why did he get away? Because he was paying people, because people were beholden to him. I'm trying to get at the power dynamics. That's what I'm trying to focus a light on.
Making people think is a dangerous venture, apparently. Apparently, from life experience.
And let me say this one more time clearer. Sometimes we need numbers to help us to amplify our message. Yet other people don't need those numbers. They have different things that, you know, and it's not a positive thing.
Tyra said that. Tyra said one time, numbers make her brain freeze.
No, I don't mean numbers like that. I'm talking about groups of people in agreement with you. You know, okay, I can think of so many times in a situation, maybe in a supermarket, we're all watching something. We know it's wrong. We're all looking at each other. Everybody's eyes, we're looking. Finally, somebody, often me, but sometimes somebody else, says the first word. Then everybody else jumps on, and then we see change.
Yeah.
Sam?
I just observed in the last minute or two that Stacy repeated what I felt she was feeling and saying because I heard a response that came a little bit too quickly.
From who?
From Barry. So I'm suggesting that more can actually be conveyed and more a sense of hearing and listening when one lets the statement linger rather than immediately respond. If I may, let me say one more follow-up to that. About a week or so ago, I forget, I posted something in GCC which said something like, empathic listening is not always immediately coming up with a relatable data point from your own life. Because when you quote so quickly follow up with a relatable story from your own life, it kind of shifts attention away from the first speaker and the first message that was being delivered. And then the first speaker sees the focus shift to the second speaker and the second speaker's anecdote. And I think there's a tendency for that first speaker then to feel unheard when that relatable moment from the second speaker comes so quickly. Over.
I think this is what I mentioned maybe an hour ago, that we don't pause, not have an idea sink in, because then it's such a fight over the next speaking time and not really being able to subsume and resonate. And only when we bring ideas together and maybe in a catalytic or fermenting process, something new can evolve, like an emergence.
I've often heard the host interrupt or bring up a subject that somebody else was talking about previously, which was interrupted by another speaker who went off on a different tangent, and they lost that thread. So the host, who was an excellent moderator, has taken the group back to that thread and re-enlivened the conversation back to the topic where somebody was thinking they needed to be heard. They needed to be heard, and they were sidetracked. They were brushed aside by somebody else who thought they had more important topic they had to throw in the soup. So it's up to the skill of the moderator or the host, I think, Barry.
This morning, as I was fixing breakfast, a word came to mind, and it's a word I love. The word is enthusiasm. I really like, generally speaking, enthusiasm. And whenever a word comes to mind, I have a habit of saying, what's the antonym? What is the opposite? And I was looking for a word that's the antonym of enthusiasm. And I actually don't have one, except I have a definition for what the word would be, and it's spirit draining. The opposite of enthusiasm is spirit draining. And there ought to be a word for it, maybe there is. But one of the things that dismays me, dispirits me, is the presence of a spirit draining phenomena. There's a term that's in American slang called energy creature. I don't know if anybody recognizes this term, energy creature, but it's a kind of a pejorative term for somebody who has the habit of draining the oxygen out of the room, draining the enthusiasm, and leaving people in kind of a state of dismay and dispiritedness. And I wish I understood better this dynamic between elevating enthusiasm and draining it, draining spirit. But it's on my mind.
Hope versus despair.
Well, despair is sort of extreme loss of spirit, enthusiasm. Yes, despair would be one of the words that fits in that antonym space. Yeah. Something that brings everybody down.
What brings me down is that if we finish the session and somebody who had a block is not satisfied, they've gone away from the session without having that block resolved. But if we made progress, then that's enthusiasm. To me, that's great. That means we've got 2 or 3 bullet points that we can summarize for the group session and say, this is the progress we made today. And it'll be noted on the minutes sheet for next time we come to the meeting. But nobody ever reads the minutes from the previous group. So, you know, it's a pointless exercise. Over.
Sam has his hand up.
Energy vampire.
Hey, Barry, I wanted to respond to your notion about draining energy from a room.
Yeah.
It is possible to say something that leaves everyone thoughtful. And when everyone is thoughtful, then typically when one is thinking, one doesn't speak until that thinking is more clear.
Mhm.
And sometimes it is difficult to read the energy in a room. And often it's easy, much easier to jump to a conclusion that, oh, I just sapped the energy of the room, or, oh, everybody just, lost that energy. It could be that other people are thinking. It could be that other people are reflecting on the implications. I do often note that when people say the energy drained from a room, or I'm holding space for something, that's a very subjective view that almost is power over by defining what the room is for everyone else, instead of really, really, really be sensitive to each person's energy level. So I'm only urging a caution when one speaks for the energy of a room from a very subjective view. Over.
So how do we establish the methodology that prevents the energy from the room being sucked out?
Well, there's that attendant corollary which also says that when everybody is really energized or everybody is really interrupting each other, I mean, there's a lot of energy there also, but is it the right energy that we really want? Or that's conducive to collaboration or conducive to moving mental models and theories of mind forward? Even the relationships, is that the kind of energy that we want? So I think the nature of that energy is also very important. When everyone is calm and serene and contemplative, someone may say, oh, there's very little energy in the room. When everybody's really excited and aggravated, interrupting each other, someone could say, oh, there's a lot of energy in that room. But I'd prefer to be in that calm meditative room rather than the high energy room in those cases. So it's very important to understand what is really going on and not be so prejudiced about your own understanding of the energy level. Over.
I can see this intention in the different kinds of sessions. The energy changes. So there's a lot more contemplative reflection in an unblocking session than there is in a barn raising session, for example. So this intention factor. Sorry, over.
And that's where I interrupted you, because I want to go on the record as saying that's a wide generalization.
Rainer, you raised your hand.
Yes, again, this ambiguity of words. What energy? For what? Is it a creative Heureka spark? And then I have met various discussions group preferably from South America and other countries, and especially women who talk at the same time, and it's all laughing and glowing and creation, but there also could be the energy of distraction, of having a bigger fire, or taking more energy for one's own purpose. So again, consider what is the intention, as I mentioned earlier, for what is created with this Horeca. Think about this Iranian Ahura Mazda Persian religions. Energy, sun, light is very powerful, very creative, and very dangerous.
You know, I had an experience that connected my heart with my mind. And it was an awakening, really. It's the importance of having some connection there. It's like the shortest journey a man can ever take, from your head to your heart. And but it's the most important one, I think, because metaphorically speaking, your heart is where your emotions are contrived. Over.
Barry?
I want to go back to, how do you discern the sense of the energy or lack of energy in the room? I remember, this goes way back, I think it's October, when I was writing song parodies in response to Stacy's prompts. And one of the lines of one of my song parodies was, Sam strokes his beard. Sam strokes his beard is, he's in a contemplative state. He's thinking about something and contemplating it. And that's pretty evident. That's probably a pretty good reading of Sam strokes his beard.
Unless he's itching.
Because he hasn't showered yet. And then there's the other one where, I won't say any names, had a downcast countenance. Had a downcast countenance. Which is very different from, So yeah, I think you can read the valence of energy both up and down. And it certainly helps if you can, get a clear, people have their camera on and you can see, versus Stacy.
Yeah, I would disagree. I would say that there's always at least two different possibilities for what you think you're reading.
At least two.
At least two. Well, I'm saying itching or contemplative. Those are two. There may be more, but that's where I think confirmation is required before you go to the next step.
Sam, you have your hand up, and then Alex.
Yep. I'd like to tell a story. It comes from a music background, okay? I used to coach kids in San Luis Obispo in chamber music workshops, and I also used to conduct the orchestra there. And every year, we would get guest musicians to join and also join the faculty and teach the kids. So one time I was actually in front of the entire orchestra, and I asked a question: how do you convey intensity? How do you convey energy when you're actually playing an instrument as an orchestra? And most of the kids raised their hand and say, make the music louder. And I said, yeah, but there's a better way. The better way is to be precise. For all 20 of you to hit the note exactly at the right microsecond. To all of you decrescendo or have a crescendo in exactly the right time frame. For that timpani to hit with that particular set of strings, okay? That kind of precision indicates that everybody's locked in, everybody's intense, everybody's energy is really going with the music. And one of my best friends now was the guest solo violinist in that particular rehearsal. His name is George, okay? And he never forgot that. He said that was something he had never heard addressed to an orchestra before, and he really liked it. He and I have been really good friends. So this idea of really being focused, of really being precise with your words, with your actions, with your countenance, all of it in alignment, is an intensity, is an energy that I think is music making. And we can actually apply that to communication and collaboration and being as well. It's not just being loud. It's not just talking for a long time. It's being precise. And that level of precision requires a clarity. And that level of clarity requires a focus. And that level of focus requires attention and listening. All of that together is really desirable energy to make music, and I would claim to make collaboration and communication also. Over.
If I could just add, I think that's when Doug talks about presence. I think that presence is another one of those things that adds to the intensity. So I think that's part of the equation as well.
Interesting, because dance and singing and music require synchrony.
Requires what?
Synchrony. And synchrony is interesting because in Talking Heads, there really isn't any significance of synchrony.
And I'll add again, emotion. I mean, think about the difference when you sing a song or when you really sing it from your heart. That's presence.
When two hearts beat as one. Synchrony.
Mhm.
So on that note, and with an eye on the clock,
Yeah.
I'm at the end of my unblocking rope here. I appreciate all of you, and I appreciated this session. And the beat lives on.
Synchronously.
We
Yeah.
really should have a theme song to like sing our way out. There should be.
Let the days go by, water flowing under.
Ba bum 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 ba, bum 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 bum
How about
bum 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 ba bum 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 ba-dum bum bum ba bum bum
Recognize
bum 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 bum
Sesame Street?
Sesame Street.
bum 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 bum.
There's a
This
new
session
speaker
brought
on
to
the
you
market.
by the letter Q and the number 5.
You had to pick Q? Happy trails to you. Okay, bye.
Bye all. Enjoy your Sunday.